started. So thank you everybody for being here. We're letting folks roll in. I'm really excited about today. I'm really excited about our guests, these really dope organizers that we're gonna get to hear from tonight. And super excited that folks get to take home a bunch of wisdom today about defending our communities. I think we're all very aware of the times we're living in. We're living in a time of heavy grief, of chaos and catastrophe around every corner and at every moment. And so a lot of people are learning and waking up to the realization that we've been barred from for a long time, which is that communities are the only way forward, the only way to survive in a nation like this, in a nation built on so much violence and so much history. So I'm really excited that we get to impart some knowledge today, to share some wisdom and help folks really get started on some community initiatives to take care of each other, because that's the only way forward. So before we really get started and dive into things, I also feel like it's only appropriate, I'm calling in from Dallas, Texas today, to take a moment of silence for the school children and educators of Uvalde, Texas, as well as folks in Buffalo and everybody else who has been lost to settler colonial violence in recent weeks. So folks will join me in a moment of silence. Awesome. So the way things are going to go today, I'm going to introduce myself and stop talking without a name. And then I'm going to give our wonderful panelists a chance to introduce themselves and say whatever they like to say. And then the way things are going to work is I'm going to ask a few pre-prepared questions to really dig into these folks' brains, learn a lot from their experiences in doing mutual aid community defense work, and just really hear what knowledge that they'd like to impart on us and share experiences, highs and lows, that sort of thing. The chat/Q&A is open at all times. So folks are welcome to submit questions if they have them now, just, things that they want to know about these organizers based on who they are and their backgrounds, or as things come up. So after I ask a couple of my own questions, we're going to open it up for some Q&A. And so after that, after we chat, after we, hear from each other, it's really going to be conversational here. We're really just taking a chance to, sit around a table with a couple of folks who have some really great experience and hard work behind them and see what we learned. And then after that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Courtney, who's going to lead us through this really, really amazing resource that they've put together based on a decade of experience organizing and agitating in the Southwest, that they're going to walk us through kind of an introduction. It is a really amazing and thorough resource meant for folks to take home to their actual, in-person communities to build up their own community defense infrastructure. And so they're going to introduce us to that tool, which will be shared with everybody probably tonight, as well as in an email and the follow-up to this webinar. As a reminder, as of all PSN offerings, this webinar will be recorded and posted to the PSN Resource Bank, and we'll be sure to drop that link in the chat also. Without further ado, I said I'll stop talking without saying who I am. My name is Jasmine. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, but currently living on Kickapoo land in Dallas, Texas. I'm 22 years old. I am one of the network organizers here at PowerShift Network, which basically means my job is to build relationships with young people in the climate movement around the country that are in our network. And I do trainings and webinars like this and, writing and other resources, and really make sure that the youth climate movement here has what it needs to succeed and shift the power that it wants to shift. So I want to open it up to our wonderful guest. Courtney, do you want to start off first and then we'll just go around?
Yes, thank you, Jasmine, for introducing us and bringing us into this space. Makuam, Matu, my name is Courtney. My pronouns are they, them. I'm currently located in Tiwa Territory, which is so-called Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am the social media lead for PowerShift Network as well, and I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Hi, y'all. I'm Mariana. I use they, she pronouns. I'm born and raised on Seminole and Miccosukee lands, also known as Miami, and I'm currently based in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is the unceded territory of the Abenaki peoples. And I'm involved with undergraduate union organizing. So we just recently become the 5th recognized undergraduate union in the nation. And I know, so amazing. And also some other mutual aid stuff through prison abolition work based in Mississippi. And yeah, so nice to meet y'all.
Congratulations, that's awesome. Hi, I'm Ida. I am part of Bulbencha Collective. I'm also on the network, I'm phasing out of the network support team for the PowerShift network. I am on Homa lands down in so-called Louisiana, along the Gulf Coast. It is unceded territory. As of the Louisiana Purchase Agreement that was never, you know how it goes. Welcome. Thank you everyone for being here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, folks. I am super excited. Y'all can't see it on my face, but I'm so excited. These are folks who, some of these folks I've known for a couple of years, some of them I've known for just a couple months, but I've already learned so much. I feel like I'm 100% the baby organizer in the room, and I'm super excited for them to share with y'all some of the things that they've shared with me. So without further ado, we're gonna jump right into things. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions that'll also be in the chat. Just now I enabled the live transcript so folks can follow along that way as well. And as a final reminder, if you don't catch anything, this will all be recorded and posted online. So just to get us started, my first question for you folks, and answer, whatever order you'd like, as many times as you like. So what would you most like to share about your organizing journey and your mutual aid or community defense work? So, if you were talking to somebody, what is it that you'd most like to talk about in this or share in this very specific type of work?
I guess I'll jump in. I'm actually in my early 30s, so I'm probably the oldest here. I can't remember. Regardless, been doing this a long time. And I started in Massachusetts, and then I moved down to my homelands to further deepen my work. And I think that something that really struck me is that how different it is. Like the climate for doing activism differs on where you are, and you just kind of have to work within what you have and the people that are around you, and work at the speed of the actual ability to do the work. So don't feel super underwhelmed or overwhelmed either way with what you're doing. Take it one step at a time, take it one day at a time, and building that community is going to be so key. Like building community is community defense, because you are inherently learning the people by you and defending your community. You're involved.
I'm happy to go next. I think as a contrast, I might be the youngest person here. I just recently turned 22, but I've been organizing since I was in high school in Miami. And I guess something that I like to share is just take time to find your political home. And that's something that was so important to me, just finding people that I really, really connected with. Like, again, like Ida mentioned, finding community is so important. That is actually community defense, building the people that you actually can call both comrades and friends. Because I think that there is a distinction, right? Like the people that you organize with might not necessarily be the people that you want to be friends with, but sometimes they can be. And I think that that is what makes organizing for me so special, like people that I genuinely trust, just being in my network that I know I can reach out to. And that's something that's been so important, especially as somebody has moved so often in their early adult years, like from 18, and now I'm moving again pretty soon. So I think just finding a political home and really thinking about like what kind of spaces you want to organize with. So I started a lot with like organizing in Miami around like immigration. And I was just able to like piece different threads together. And now I really find a lot of overlap with prison abolition organizing, right? Because yeah, that's a little bit self-explanatory, but I can talk about it later. But I think that that is just like really important to me. Just finding a political home, I think would be my 2 cents.
For me, it's been a lot of trial and error and failure, and not recognizing soon enough that the people that you are directly organizing with are the people that you should be doing mutual aid for. So a lot of people think about doing mutual aid for a community that is like an extension outside of them, but it's actually about being in like mutually reciprocal relationships with the people you're organizing with and learning how to show up for one another, because usually those of us organizing are also experiencing our own set of crisis and trauma. And if we don't care for each other, the work doesn't extend beyond us.
Super appreciate that. Oh, sorry, Ida, go ahead.
No, you're good. I actually kind of wanted to jump in, and I mean, this is an intro to mutual aid and community defense panel. So I kind of wanted to ask if I can ask a question, because I kind of want to really nail down what is mutual aid? What is the difference between mutual aid and other kinds of solidarity maybe with communities? Because something that we talk about a lot, that comes up a lot down here, is solidarity, this mutual aid versus charity, because charity and these different power structures inherently flavor how you interact with communities. Like Courtney was saying, like, who are your people? Who is it that you are in community with, and how are you helping each other mutually? I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that too.
I'm happy to jump in first on this one if I'm allowed to participate here. This is definitely a super challenging one, and one that I think a lot of mutual aid groups that I've, seen or been in community with recently are really struggling with. How do you move beyond just recreating charity structures? And I think a key part of it, the more I kind of like study mutual aid a little bit, is the importance of like, one, a kind of educational aspect of it, not just giving out goods, but also bringing folks into conversation around the systemic issues that are putting y'all in this position. But then also a sense of drawing folks into the work. It's not just handing things out. It's being like, hey, we're so happy to provide this for you. And of course, there's no strings attached. We want people to have their needs met. But if you have the time, how would you like to join us? How would you like to also be a part of this, so that, if you have the time, if you have the resources, is there a way that you'd like to contribute to this effort that's, supporting you? How would you like to join us in supporting our neighbors? I think this is a huge challenge, especially growing up in the United States. We've been taught a super toxic hyper individualism. So many folks don't understand, or have been torn from kind of ancestral understandings that like community is everything, and that the way that we live is by taking care of each other, and that you should be, I grew up, knowing my neighbors, running it at my neighbors' houses, being in a kind of community in that way. But as time goes on, that's less and less common of an experience of just relying on the folks who actually live around you and having a relationship there. We've been taught very antagonistic kind of understandings of our neighbors. And for so many of us, we don't live in safe places. But yeah, at least what I've kind of learned and observed, and what I'm always thinking about and trying to move efforts away from recreating charity models, is like, how are you not just handing out, but also not again, recreating like missionary models where you have like really like gross, expectations of like, I'm going to give you a thing and you owe us something, not about owing, but about, working to instill a sense of community responsibility to everybody, the folks who are starting off and who are already ready to give, but then the folks that they are giving to in the first round and the second round of the recipients of that mutual aid. How are you looping them back in, and getting folks invested in that kind of community work? But I'd love to hear from other folks.
What you just said reminds me so much of the work done across Latin America. And particularly, I'm thinking about like Martha Harnecker and her work on mass protagonism, and really thinking about like what it means to build, like all of us are equally responsible, or can have this like protagonistic relationship to the movement, right? Like we are constantly hearing about like leaders, but actually like we can all learn from each other, and we can all teach each other. I think that that's something that's been so important in the work that I'm interested in, like thinking about like political education curricula and mutual aid, just like learning new things from each other, especially as like a young person. Like I just take so much, yeah, I just love being able to connect with other people in that way. And then something else, I feel like mutual aid for me has been like so deeply rewarding when I think about like the people that I am most in community with, like even if it's just helping somebody pay a bill, but then they have like the like mutual aid looks differently. Like I can help you like pay a bill online, and then you can like sit with me and just have a conversation with me. And that is in this like really egregious violent moment, like that is enough for me. Like I think it's really about building like these different kinds of relationalities and ways of being that are antagonistic to like racial capitalism, settler colonialism, to the dominant modes of violence that kind of script our worlds. So I feel like that is one way that I'm thinking about it now after hearing you talk a little bit. So I really appreciate that, Jasmine.
I hope we answered your question a little bit, Ida. And I hope we dive into it some more as we keep talking, because my next question is pretty much along those same lines. So, if folks want to expand on this, it's fine. If it's crickets and radio silence, I can also move on. But my next question was, what does community defense mean to you? And how did you come to recognize personally the importance of it?
I think that community defense is a really, really broad understanding, but I think a lot of people assume that it's like maybe showing up to like physically battle with people, which that's like an aspect of it, right? I do believe in like armed defense and militia and things like that. But I think community defense is a lot more broad and can be really malleable depending on where you're from, right? Like Ida was saying earlier, that every location that we live in, white supremacy manifests differently. It materializes differently, and we have different issues to face. That's not to like say any place is worse or than the other. It's just that we're up against something that's like very intricate. So sometimes community defense looks like showing up to feed people. Sometimes it's growing a garden. It's doing education. It's childcare. To me, community defense is building infrastructure and autonomous power with your neighbors and your friends and your family, um, and with the sole purpose of taking back and reclaiming power away from the state. So right now we're kind of in a really abusive, like dependent relationship with the state, where when we need help or we need resources, we have to rely on police or prisons or even psych wards or mental health facilities, or even an agricultural industry to make us food, right? And it never really pulls through for us, maybe for some people, but for the majority of people, the global majority of people aren't being served by the state. So for me, community defense looks like us coming together to start building the infrastructure that we need to be taken care of.
I have a lot of thoughts about this, living where I do and like living in this very unique community. So my family and where I live has been called ground zero of climate change, and I very much feel that. I am probably like a half hour, 45 minutes from the actual water of the Gulf. And so like when Hurricane Ida, yes, I know I get it all the time. When Hurricane Ida blew through, I was literally trapped in my town for a couple days. And so we really come up against this reality of the state and state services are literally either literally cannot get to you, or they are literally also actively upkeeping genocide of indigenous peoples in order for like land. There's a whole lot to this, but like the state has active want and need to claim land that indigenous people still live on down here because of oil and mineral rights. So that's still something that we deal with. And so like we have to deal with the reality of like, well, we're not going to restore power to you, we're not going to give you food and things that you need, there is no water for you, kind of thing. And so how can we protect each other and these really innovative DIY community ways of like, I don't have water to flush my toilet, well, this person over here has a water catch and they can loan you a bucket of water to flush your toilet kind of thing. We really are at that kind of level. And so all of these ways of, like Courtney said, building infrastructure for the inevitable eventual collapse of societal systems and societal like conveniences is something we deal with yearly. And it's only getting worse as hurricane season expands and is literally a month earlier than it used to be back in the day. So being able to bring people into this movement, for instance, you know, my mom, I brought my mom into doing stuff like this. She was just like, I live a little bit away. I want to help. I didn't have internet for like 2 months or something like that. And so she was going online and kind of using a way of blending these state resources and mutual aid resources, because we have a really robust network down here of like, I had her reposting on Facebook, on the mutual aid group, all of these different, oh, well, this church has this. And then she's talking with her friend. Well, my friend has this carload full of baby formula. And so I was literally, we had a whole ton of that sensitive baby formula. And I've been mailing it out to people. I've been mailing it out to union halls because they're on strike and they're not able to get their thank you about my kiku, it's great. But being able to take the resources from one place that we were given in our hour of need and get that out to other people, like that's continuation of this mutual aid where we have one need and we need to send it out to somebody else. Circular economies are a great way of defense, and it all kind of rolls in together, and there's all these different words and like buzzwords and like tactics of doing these same things that is at its core building community and building sustainability and reliability within ourselves and our small community networks. Sorry for the rant. It's just like one thing and then you're like, oh, but this other thing overlaps too, and then this other thing, you're like, crap, the whole system, we just need to burn it. So we can do that too.
My thoughts exactly. Please don't apologize. We definitely appreciate that. I apologize because my dog is having a time on the balcony, if y'all can hear. But no, yeah, I definitely appreciate everybody's perspective on how encompassing community defense is and how much it's already a necessity in so many places. I think for a lot of folks, we are in the planning stage, and a lot of us are in a position where we can start to think about how can we be ready to prepare our communities as things ramp up. But it is really appreciated, this reminder that especially Indigenous communities and folks who live in rural places and folks who've been routinely abandoned by the government have been doing this kind of work intensely for so long. And so that's really important to remember that there are folks to learn from and to lean on, and who have been doing this work without much support for a long time. So along those same lines, I'd love to hear from everybody around. So in your particular settings, Mariana, you've done this kind of work on a college campus in New England, as well as in Miami. Kay, you've been around the Southwest, and Ida, you've been in the Wancha area for a long time. What did y'all find particularly challenging about doing this work in that place in particular, and where you're from in particular, but also what's special about it to you? And if you have any thoughts for other folks doing work in the same kind of setting or community setting, what would you like to share?
I can definitely kick us off. I think Hanover, New Hampshire is a very special place, and I think in a lot of ways, I think there has been a very long history of different mutual aid networks, especially among the folks that live here longer, right? So not college students, but people that actually have called the Upper Valley their home, especially the Abenaki peoples. And this is I go to an institution built on settler colonial violence, anti-Blackness, austerity, racial capitalism, all the things that you can imagine. It's quite literally older than the United States. So that tells you a lot about the kinds of histories and violences that this institution partakes in. So yeah, I guess one of the things to your question, sorry, I'm also neurodivergent. So as soon as you asked the question, I forgot it. But one of the things that is particularly challenging is just the fact that ultimately we're college students. So there's this constant cycle of losing institutional memory and then having an upsurge of folks that are really involved. And then again, Dartmouth in particular is really unique because of the fact that we operate on a quarter system, and particularly because they did not want to admit people that were not men and build housing for them, they invented this thing called the D plan, which essentially means that not like you have to leave at some point during the academic year because you will not get housing. So there's also a housing crisis on top of the fact that this is an austere institution that pays their students like $9 an hour during a pandemic, which is why we unionized. So there's like a lot of different factors that play into this. So I think that that is one of the most challenging things, just having to deal with like ultimately like one of the largest non-profit for-profit organizations in the country and probably the world. Like they train the kind of people that we go up against. Like these are the people that I have to sit in classrooms with and like sometimes listen to. But what's so special about it is the fact that like we're all really committed to making sure that the institutional memory stays alive. And we all were invested enough to actually unionize, get union cards, make sure that we presented them to the college. And we won unanimously, I think that's the word, sorry, unanimously, like 52-0. So that was just so special. The fact that we all like realized that there was like this really big institutional gap, and that we needed collective power. And the only way to do that was actually to unionize. And one of the things that was so helpful was like, as people were losing shifts because of the pandemic, or just because they needed like mental health rest, that we were able to work with one of the other organizations here called the Dartmouth Student Union. That's not the union, but it has that name. And they had set up which I was a part of, they had set up a mutual aid fund. And we were able to use some of that money to pay people for the shifts that they were missing. So that is some of the things that, yeah, hopefully I answered the question. But anyway.
Let's jump in. My organizing in Massachusetts looked a lot different than it did down here. Funnily enough, for living in one of the wealthiest states in the entire nation, I have more resources and networks and nets, webs of safety down here in along the Gulf than I ever did up there. So a lot of my work up there was a lot of awareness. I found that people threw money at issues more than they do down here, whereas down here there's more on the ground action and people that are in similar situations. Up north, I found that there was a disconnect in terms of climate change and climate activism and how it would affect the Northeast. And so they were more willing to just throw money at it because it was just a problem for somebody else, which is funny because like the seaport was going underwater when I left. So it's like, it's gonna affect y'all too. Like flooding is happening and it was just really weird as opposed to down here where it is a literal existential day-to-day remembrance. And so down here, I'm definitely on the ground a lot more. I also found that I was worrying about living my day-to-day because the cost of life in Massachusetts was so hard. So I literally was working 60 to 80 hours a week and still trying to do organizing. and down here, I just have more space and capacity because I mean, my housing cost is half that. So I lost my thread. Where was I going? What's special about it? Down here, that interaction between people and how people connect with each other too, just fundamentally, Massachusetts people can be very cold and it's like, don't look at me, mind your own business, don't talk to me, like, And then down here, people are like, you know, how's it going? How you? How's your life? How's your kids? How's about you? And so there's just a fundamental like person-to-person difference of organizing where I'm able to create deeper connections. I have the neighborhood kids that come around. They know that this is a safe space. Their parents know who I am. Their parents know that this is a safe space, that they can come here for, I literally have a shelf out on my front porch. People come up on the shelf and take what it is they need. I have never had anything stolen from my house. I just put things that I either have for donation out front, or if I have clothes and stuff, I don't even need to go to Salvation Army. I just put it on my front porch, because I have made this place known as a place where you can freely come and ask for what it is that you need. And that's just over the course of a year and a half, maybe. The kids talk about, I'm also like a weirdo. So the kids, I know that the kids talk about me to themselves, and they know that they can come here for whatever it is. You know, one kid brought her mom over for like, for family planning kind of thing, of like, I need a test. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm freaking out. Like, I'll go get it for you right now. I'm like, I am so proud of the fact that the kids know that, like, everybody in the neighborhood knows that they can come here. And just creating that kind of safety and non-judgmental zone for people to have the courage, or not even courage, like no stress, no judgment, to be able to come and ask for what it is that they need. That's the kind of community that I want to live in. And so for me, I'm also going to transition this into the next question that I see in the chat. What does mutual aid look like in various digital platforms? I use it to bring awareness to my community a lot of times, where I'm raising money for groups of people. I personally try to focus my mutual aid fundraising organizing, just because I have low capacity and I'm involved in everything, on either groups that can self-sustain themselves, as opposed to a person who just needs their rent for the thing. Not that that's not important, that is super important, but my personal organizing time is spent better organizing for groups of people and for sustainable options, where once they get their feet under them, they're able to help their own communities. And so that's kind of what I try to aim for personally.
I was thinking about this question. What's been challenging about the Southwest? All I could think of was men, and then I was like, that's not unique to the Southwest. But it made me think a little bit deeper about what kind of issues have come from men in organizing spaces. And I think what's been difficult for me in the Southwest, and again, this is likely not unique out here either, but fractured communities, and organizers who can be more consumed in ego and clout. Those type of things can be really detrimental to like an entire like local region's attempts at building relationships and infrastructure together. So for me, my struggles in that last like decade of time has been watching men tear organizers down, primarily organizations that are led by queer and trans, Black and Indigenous people.
Thank you so much. I super appreciate those reminders. I think this is what I was really excited about this webinar, is to really get honest. You know, this isn't necessarily focused on, you know, workplaces and, you know, within the nonprofit. This is about our real on the ground communities and saving each other's lives. And I think that's really honest reminder that in this era, like when entering this kind of work, again, we're not trying to replicate charity. We're not trying to replicate violent and harmful structures within our communities. We're showing up, and part of showing up is showing up for the work and not showing up for ourselves. We're showing up to get your needs met and meet others' needs, but, you know, not for you know, more sinister kind of motive. So I appreciate that, the honesty there. Like, we've all kind of seen that happen in these spaces, especially in the age of digital organizing. So it's really important that, yeah, like that's what I'm really loving hearing from everyone, like what really brings you to this work, and what really keeps you here. So I'm going to ask this one last question. Feel free to hop in, or, you know, whatever may have you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kay, just because I feel like it's a kind of great introduction or transition here. Is just, what is it that excites or grounds or moves you about working alongside your local community members?
I love that we're all Aries. Sorry, I just needed to point that out. Love that. I think something that excites me a lot is, again, something that I spoke to earlier, the fact that like I was just able, oh, sorry, Jasmine. But that I was able to just like make friends this way. I don't mean that like superficially. I think that like when I speak to friendship, I generally mean like people that I've built like a lot of trust for, and I know genuinely I know that these people would show up for me, and I think that that's something that really excites me. Just the fact that like I can see quite literally like in this period of like such egregious violence and a lot of sustained and anticipatory grief, I feel a lot of hope. And I think that that's something that like not a lot of people can say, but I genuinely feel like deeply cared for. And I feel really hopeful about the fact that like I am building relationships that go beyond the material, like speaking as somebody that's from a city, beyond the material urbanization and like physical accumulation of capital. Like I'm able to actually see my relationships transcend this like locus of violence, and go against that locus of violence. And I think that that's so like it's fucking beautiful. Like I think about that all the time as somebody that like, you know, I have a lot of love for Miami. It's always going to be my home. It's where I was born and raised, and it's generally where like a lot of like my actual thinking and like experience as an organizer comes from. Just thinking deeply about like this place that is like such a unique meeting ground for so many different histories, like histories of like settler colonialism, histories of Marunage, histories of like Indigenous and Black solidarities, histories of imperial violence, right? Like Miami is known as this place where like a lot of like Latin American immigrants fleeing the US end up coming. So I think that there's like a lot of tension there, and I can see how like beyond that tension, people are able to come together and go up against the state, and that brings me so much hope. And like I don't know, it goes to show, it shows me a lot of possibility, and I try to hold that as much as possible when we're in this like deeply fucked up time. Yeah, like the state is burning, and I can see that happening in Miami, and that is pretty much like what keeps me going some days. So yeah.
I definitely agree with you. I think that the relationships and the strengths and knowing how we work together under crisis and that we are here for each other is something that you really, I mean, there's trauma bonding and there's crisis bonding, but like, you know that this person is going to show up and do what it is that they need, that y'all work together and that y'all are going to survive together. Like there's something so powerful about that. I think something else that really keeps moving me to do this work is the realization that I have privileges and love and things in my life that there are people who are in my neighborhood have never experienced and might never, but I might be the first person giving them this and showing them that there is a better way, that you can be a little weirdo and a good person and like genuinely care. And some people are just like amazed that you care. And like, I think it's really sad and beautiful. And like, I can also recognize that in myself, where like, I'm not a person that grew up with a lot of friends. I'm not a person whose family is well off. We deal with intergenerational poverty, and just like the fact that I was able to grow up in a loving home is something really special. And I want to be able to share that with people and share that like, there are good things, and there are good things that you can look forward to, and there are good things that you can work towards, and that your life doesn't have to be whatever, like we're so conservative down here, and so like your life doesn't have to be what is told it has to be. Like there's a better way. We don't, I fight with my dad all the time, like it is what it is. He says all the time, like it is what it is. I'm not going to do anything about it because I'm going to die by the time this climate change stuff hits anyway. I'm just like, cool, dad, thanks, great, awesome. And like it doesn't have to be that way. He's such a boomer. And like this, I agree that there is a shift happening, that we are part of this shift, and that there will be something better at the end of all of this dumpster fire. We just have to like move the dumpster out of the damn way, and we can do that. It's okay, we can do that.
I think for me, it's building the relationships with people that feels like the support you maybe should have had, like growing up, you know? So, like, I don't know, there's in organizing, there's so much like raw joy that's happening on the ground. Like when you're like packing things or cooking with people or just like out patrolling, like there's so much raw joy and vulnerability that is shared. Just in those one-on-one interactions, that's what makes me feel grounded, especially like all the auntie cackles and like all the jokes, all the inside jokes that get built. And it just feels like, it really does feel like family, you know? For me, that's very grounding.
I feel like that's a really great way of putting it. The support that we should all deserve all along, you've definitely found in those spaces. So I appreciate that. And I see we have one more question in the chat, but it's perfect transition into exactly what we're about to get into. So if someone asks, how do you get started? It is very overwhelming, especially if you aren't already connected with the community or there's barriers to connecting with the community. And just knowing that there are so many problems and you don't know what to address. And I think that's the most amazing transition ever, because Courtney is going to walk us through a little bit of how that works. Well, maybe not walk us through how it works, but they've created an amazing resource, which is a 40+ page workbook that is meant for folks to take home with their communities to work through together as they build up their own mutual aid or community defense initiatives. So I'm really, really excited to be sharing this resource with folks, but Courtney has been working on this for a long time and can explain it better than I can. So I'll hand it over to them for the next little while.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. So I am going to do a little presentation. It should be pretty quick, and it's not going to go through the full scope of this workbook because the workbook is very long, and it's going to take a long time. But of course, if anyone ever wants to like hash it out with me or have a meeting or something like that where I just talk about it a little bit more, I'm always open to that. So I'll drop my email at the end. But in the meantime, I'm about to share my screen. But before I do that, I'm going to drop a link here to the workbook. This first link that I'm dropping is the PDF print. It's a digital download. But if this one is better if you're trying to print it at home to fill it out. And then the second link that I'm going to drop for y'all is a fillable form, so that if you want to fill it out on your phone or on your computer, you could do that. Yeah, that way. Because like, honestly, I don't know about y'all, but printers are expensive, and who has a printer at their house? Not me. Okay, cool. So there's the links. Y'all can download that. You can follow along while I talk about it. And if you're having issues with the link, let me know. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen now. I really don't like sharing my screen, to be honest, because it's just too much is going on. Okay, so not my Pinterest. Here it is. Okay. All right, everybody can see this good. I'm hoping there's no issues. It is a good question. How do you begin?
Wait, can you give me, oh no, sorry. I just figured out what the problem. Sorry, folks. I'll be dropping the link again.
Did it work?
No, I think we shared it with just the host and panelists. I'll share it with everybody.
Oops, my bad. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. You can just see my Slack. Really? Let me see. Okay. We'll just force quit Slack. Sorry, y'all. This is difficult. I'm very like tech. I know I'm like a digital communications person, but like technology, it really, we don't mesh. Okay. Back. All right. So can y'all see the presentation now?
Now we're just looking at you. Sorry.
I'll be sorry.
It's okay.
I'm struggling, y'all. Okay, cool.
There we go. Yeah. Great job. Great job.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. let's do this. So community defense, I guess I could give you a little bit of an introduction. I've been organizing since high school, honestly, but not really with a lot of like political language to really understand the work that I was doing. I moved to Kinlani, which is so-called Flagstaff, Arizona, which is northern Arizona, to go to college when I was 18. And I lived there for about 9.5 years. And I started doing work, I guess it would be considered university organizing, but the organizing was actually only happening because the people I was in community with weren't actually being served by the university, right? So we were being pushed out in a lot of ways and not having the resources that we needed to feel encouraged or to succeed. So mutual aid started for me before I ever knew that it was called mutual aid. And that kind of began with just like literally seeing our queer community members being kicked out of the university, like not having housing, like it came down to like moving people, like hosting people in our couches, in our dorms, like buying hotels for people, cooking food. So that kind of work really began before, I don't know, we didn't call it mutual aid. We were just like showing up for each other. And I think mutual aid is like a great word to describe things, but a lot of people do this type of work and they don't call it mutual aid. So I think it's just important to think about that. But this workbook that I've made is based off of work that I have done in community with others. So I'm gonna work through 6 steps with y'all, and it kind of helps you to figure out how to get started. So if you have questions about like, how do I do this work? This is gonna help you out. My first advice would really to be, look in your community to see if there's already mutual aid organizations that exist and try to volunteer with them. But if there isn't something like that, or if the mutual aid organizations that do exist are doing work that maybe isn't in line with what you want to do, and you are interested in creating your own type of work, then this guidebook would be really useful for you. So 6 steps: community, climate, and context. We're going to pinpoint single issue and solution, figure out your audience, figure out what type of skills and training you need. We're going to address our personal triggers and capacity, and then review like materials, resources, and tools that we need to get the work done. I got some cute little pictures of Black Panthers, the free breakfast program, which I'm grateful for because that's how I ate as a kid. And down to the left is the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. Cool. So step 1 is community, climate, and context. This is something that we kind of, I'd have brought up about just how white supremacy looks different everywhere, right? And so that's why I believe that organizing from a local scale is really important. But I'm also an anarchist, so like I don't really believe in like national organizing, or I'm not gonna throw shade at it or anything, but I just personally see from my experience that working in a local context does a lot to change people's material conditions. So I think the first step of entering into doing mutual aid work or community defense work is to figure out, you're kind of like taking like a temperature check of like where you live at. So like, where do you see resources and support falling through in your community? Are there Black and Indigenous community members who keep asking for something or keep bringing attention to something in the community? And that goes for all types of identities, right? Like disabled folks, queer folks, undocumented families. Like, what do you notice? Like, what kind of patterns are reoccurring that people aren't really responding to? And you're like, government, your local government, state government, whatever, isn't doing anything to take action around. So that's a great way to get started, is to just take like a temperature check, because you want to be doing work that's actually addressing what people need. And on this left, I have a picture of just like one of the pages in the workbook. The second step is going to be figuring out a single issue and solution. So this can all be really overwhelming because there's a lot going on all the time. And it's like, it's just going to keep happening, you know, until we start getting better organized. but it can be really overwhelming to be like, I live in a really racist, homophobic, like it's just so white supremacist where I live at. Like there's so many issues, I don't even know where to start. It's really grounding to realize that we don't all have to tackle every single thing. And it's actually not productive for us to be attacking every single issue in our community. So it's really important to kind of try to figure out and hone in on one issue that you think you want to. I mean, I think there's a lot of passion in this too. Like, what do you feel called to do? And what is also pressing, right? So try to narrow things down to one issue and don't think about it as just like structural issues. Like every town is racist, right? You can't just be like, I'm going to attack racism with my mutual aid group. Like think about it as a very specific like issue that is arising because of racism. Maybe it's gentrification. Maybe it's the fact that live in a town that is like increasingly gentrified and the majority of the unsheltered people are Indigenous people. And so you're figuring out that there's a lot of unsheltered people, and those people, they need support in a lot of different ways. So just keep narrowing it down until you can figure out what exactly you can assess with the support that you think you can pull together. The workbook that I put together, it also, so it goes through the steps for you. And then it also has a model based off of some community defense work that I had done in the past with a bunch of other brilliant organizers. So one way we pinpointed a single issue and solution was when the Trump election had just happened, he got elected, and like things were bad in the town already, like, but Trump emboldened a lot of white supremacists where I lived at. So we noticed that like a lot of people were like not making it home safely, not feeling safe in public, like getting kicked out of bars, getting kicked out of public spaces, like Black folks, queer folks, Indigenous people. There's a lot of white supremacists and Proud Boys driving around with their flags and like literally just, street harassment. So when that was an issue for us, it was like people don't feel safe in their like mode from leaving home to work or leaving work to home. People don't feel safe being outside. So that was what we decided to tackle. And so it moves into our step 3, which is your audience or the community that is in need, right? So audience might be kind of a weird word. If anyone has any critique of this, this is a workbook that I plan to continue to keep growing and building and editing, and we can always just re-upload it with every new version. So if there's anything in here that rubs you wrong or you think could be built on, just email me, we can work on it together. But for the step 3, you want to figure out who you are providing your resource, support, and mutual aid, your service for, and figure out which community is the most impacted by that issue. So like I said, we figured out that folks were like struggling to be in public and didn't have safe way to make it from one destination to the other. We decided that a safe ride share would be like the most supportive, would be the most like realistic way that we could show up for people. So if we were going to give people rides from school to work or work to home, that would also require like a hotline, right? Like people got to call us and let us know that they don't feel safe or that they need a ride. But before we even get there, we had to figure out what kind of folks are we actually like catering to. And this might seem really obvious, like, oh, like to anybody in need. It's like, yeah, I think that that's important. But sometimes when we don't be really clear about our audience, we can be flooded by people who actually have their hands in resource pools, who don't actually need this support, but like the convenience of having more support. And I'm just going to be honest, like I have been places where we have been doing mutual aid, and I have seen white people come up and take food when they didn't seem like they were unsheltered, or they seemed to me like, wanting to be part of community, but maybe not the most at need, maybe not the most impacted by the situation. So it's important to figure out who are you helping. Everybody deserves help, of course, but we want to make sure that we're providing resources and support to the people who have the least amount of access to those things. So for the safe rides, for us, that was queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color who needed those rights most. We also realized that like there was a lot of nuance. So like, you know, there's Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other folks of the global majority who also didn't feel safe, but maybe they weren't queer. So there's a lot of nuance. There's when you can sit and think about this and like really hash it out, you'll realize who are you focusing on, who are you willing to still expand your support to, and who are you not willing to support, right? And it's going to be different for any type of community defense that you're trying to do, whether that's like showing up to help people with mental health crisis, or you're trying to just cook people food, or you're trying to bring people supplies for being outside in the cold. It's going to be different. So this takes a lot of time. There's a lot of nuance and it's messy. It really is messy. It requires a lot of hard conversations. So be prepared for that. And the step 4 is skills and training. So you're going to be wanting to identify what kind of training you need in order to support the community that you're showing up for. Because it's one thing to be like, I want to do this work, and then to show up and not actually have what you need to be equipped to help the person. And that's damaging to yourself. And it's also damaging to the people that we're saying we're going to help. We don't want to misinform the community or be dishonest in our capacity. We want to be really honest about what we know how to do and what we don't know how to do. If somebody called our hotline and was like, yo, someone's like holding me hostage on the street and they have a gun or something, you know, because they didn't want to call the cops, it would be dishonest for majority of us in the group to say that we could show up and de-escalate that situation without someone getting hurt, because we didn't have the training for that. So it's really important to be really honest about like, what are you actually capable of, right? And when you can figure that out, you can also fill in the gaps, right? So I don't have de-escalation training, so I need de-escalation training. So who in the group has de-escalation training? Figuring out what y'all need, what y'all already have, and then expand from there. In extension, your outside circle is your community, right? Who in the community can train you? If you want training, you're likely going to be able to find it. So it just takes a lot of research, but don't let not having training and skills be discouraging. If you want to do the work, you can get trained. And that's like, it's so beneficial to have these type of skills, you know, whether that's bystander training, de-escalation training, crisis response. These are really great life skills, and they're going to make your community feel like they can rely on you and trust you. And these are all parts of just like building an interdependent network in your local community. It's like, if I know a certain organization is trained in de-escalation, then I'm going to be able to call them when I need de-escalation. And when we can get trained and start showing up for people and actually provide like on the ground support, we're starting to build the infrastructure we need to make like police obsolete, right? So it takes time. Like, this isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that happens with a lot of time and a lot of trust and a lot of work. But the key is really to move slowly, right? We don't want to move fast. And it might feel like it's important to be urgent, but I'm going to be honest with you. White supremacy is ongoing right now. All these issues, you know, mass shootings every week is ongoing, but like our bodies and our minds are not. So we have to be able to organize in a way that's sustainable and for the long term. And so that means moving slowly, thinking thoroughly, taking baby steps, and honoring yourself, right? So that's the 5th step, is to assess your personal triggers and capacity. This is the part of mutual aid and community defense that I see almost no organizations take seriously. But understanding your mental health, your triggers, your trauma, all that is just as important as being trained to do this work, right? Because something I love about Bell Hooks is she talks about how organizations break down over time because we show up in the same space with unaddressed trauma and our organization split. I've watched that happen. I've caused issues like that, right? So to me, this is the most important aspect of doing mutual aid or community defense work, is to actually sit with people and build trust and be vulnerable and talk about, this is my past trauma. These are the situations that trigger me. And here's the type of support that I need and the things that I need to feel grounded and safe doing this work. One, because you're making sure that you're being transparent, you're being honest and allowing everybody around you to know that these are things that cause you harm, right? Because sometimes we trigger each other, like that's going to happen, but it's never usually intentional. And if we know what triggers one another while we're doing this work, we're more likely to be mindful of it and not do those things. But if someone does get triggered and we know they're triggered by those things and we know how to support them, then we can show up and ground them a lot easier too. So to me, this is like the single most important aspect of doing any type of community organizing, is get vulnerable with each other, be honest, be messy. And it's gonna give you also a lot of time to self-reflect about what do you need? What doesn't feel safe for you? What are your boundaries doing this work? Map it out. Something that really helped me a lot, because doing safe ride works, you know, there was like a lot of potential that someone might call and we might show up to an instance where someone is like being physically violent to another person. And I have no problem being confrontational. I don't have any issues stepping in between people. And I always thought that that was like really good. I always thought that was like what you're supposed to do as a bystander, is intervene. But then I took bystander training and I learned that there's like so many different ways to intervene in a violent situation, and not all of them are confrontation. And that confrontation can sometimes actually be inflammatory to a situation. It can actually cause the person we're trying to help more distress. And I also learned that my confrontation was attached to like a fight response as a trigger for me. Growing up in an abusive household, that those type of situations where I see violence happening, they make me fight really quick. So I realized and learned a lot about myself by just sitting with my triggers and realizing that maybe all of the ways that I think are helpful in situations aren't actually helpful, right? So I think these things are really important. And if you do them, you take the time to do them, your organization is going to last a lot longer and you're going to build a lot more trust with one another. The final step is materials, resources, and tools. And this is just like the most simplest part to me. It's like, what are the actual physical material things that you need to get the work done? So for like a safe ride service specifically, like we needed like burner phones with like phone lines, which you can get really cheap at Walmart. We needed vehicles. We needed someone who had access to printing. We needed gas. We needed to use encrypted communication. We needed different ways to signify ourselves as organizers. We needed phone scripts. We needed like ways to document incidents. There's so many things. This is just, it's a non-exhaustive list. But if you sit and like take the time to think about what is all the stuff we need, when you're in the height of organizing, you won't be like, oh shit, like we got to print all this stuff last second. Who has a printer? You know what I mean? Because that happens a lot. It's also just important to know what kind of tools we need for this work, because again, like say you were doing a safe ride service. If you don't have a vehicle that can like fit a wheelchair in it, and then you show up for someone who's in a wheelchair and you can't put a wheelchair in your car, like you're causing more damage because you didn't assess these things ahead of time, right? And it looks like we're being dishonest with our community when we say we can show up. So that's a lot. I feel like, yeah, there's so much more I could say. The last thing I would say is, this is part of like the triggers and capacity in step 5, is that you really need to take care of yourself, and not just take care of yourself in like a self-care way, but like be honest with yourself about what your boundaries are and your capacity, and share that with people around you, and be really strong in your boundaries. Because when I was really young, I organized so hard. Like I feel like I've been burnt out for like 6 years. I didn't eat all the time. Granted, I couldn't really afford to eat all the time, but like I didn't prioritize that. I didn't prioritize my mental health. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't take the time to sit and be alone and like sit with my thoughts. I didn't ask for help. All that stuff is going to lead you to burnout, and it's going to make you have resentment. And those things are really, really, really hard to bounce back from. So it's really important for you to be really honest with yourself. Like, hey, I can actually only do this work from this time to this time on a Sunday, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's your ability to be honest, because if you can be honest, then you can follow through on your commitments. And when you can follow through on your commitment, you build trust with the community. So it's so much better to be like real and transparent than hyper productive and falling through and falling into the cycle of disappointment. You know what I mean? So just taking care of yourself, taking care of one another, and having fun. Be joyful. And yeah, I think that's all I could say. Probably hitting time now.
No, that was perfectly fine. I super appreciate that last one, especially. And the hard part about that, the being honest with yourself, the not overcommitting, the not stretching yourself thin for the sake of yourself and for the sake of the community you're serving. I think that's a huge, huge reminder. And I'm so appreciative for all the wisdom, all the gems you just dropped on us, Kay. So I just want to definitely thank you for that. You've put so much work into this, and we can see how much community work has gone into this, and intention and thought. And I think people are going to get so much out of this resource. So I'm really excited. So I hope folks got that link out of the chat, and that resource will also be shared out by Kay in the follow-up email. So please take this home. Go through with your community members, knock on your neighbors' doors, or go down the hall to your flatmates or your apartment mates, and really walk through this resource and work through this together, and consider what are some ways that we can turn to community defense work in the face of falling empire and all the things that are happening. Because at the end of the day, as we've so beautifully learned from all these folks, that's the only thing that we have. So if folks have any other questions that they'd like to put in the chat, feel free to do so. I just wanted to open it up. If any of you folks have, anything that's come up for you since we've been listening that you'd like to, say or impart, if you have questions for each other, while we give the audience the chance to ask a couple more questions.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you, Kay, for sharing that. It was so good. I loved it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Yakoke, for all that work that went into that.
Yes, please learn from my failures. That's all I'm going to say. Failure is a good thing. It is. You learn a lot from it. But I feel like as a millennial with Gen Z coming in, there's a lot of mistakes that y'all don't have to make because we already learned it for you,
Something I want to uplift that I tell people too, that I put in the chat, but I just want to say it out loud. Things like if you're struggling to eat, because also been there on 2 people, $20 because we're having ramen all week. Like, I don't eat ramen that much anymore because it's kind of a trigger. Like, consider getting involved in these projects like food serving, like a Food Not Bombs or something, unhoused like food distribution, because you can get some of that too. This is the mutual part of mutual aid. What is it that you need to make your life better and sustainable, and to but inherently be in community with people? Like, you're going to eat together, you're going to help people out, you might learn a few skills. And like, the other thing too is like, you might get connections, go after what it is that you're passionate about, and you might get a gig out of it. Like, it happens all the time. I need some help for this thing, I'll give you a few bucks. Like, these trading resources and uplifting of each other happens naturally. And so just trying to like put yourself out there and just take a step. And maybe where you start might not fit in. It's hard to make friends, it might be hard to connect, or maybe you have to unlearn things, or maybe the people who you're organizing with, you realize that you don't actually have the same values in common, and that's just part of growing pains. And so start at these organizations, see who is doing the work, see where you fit in, and if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. You can create something new. It's okay.
Definitely want to second that. And I want to take a moment to also, again, highlight and bring back in digital tools into the space. I know for a lot of folks, are super concerned, it's not like the pandemic is over. And as much as so many of our needs are real and in person, not that not in person is not real, but as so many things can only be met in person, there are also so many things that can happen digitally. You know, Ida shared some examples earlier from their family and what they were able to do in their community. I had a moment like this recently where a friend had to remind me about the mutual and mutual aid. I have a group of friends that whenever one of them has a need, they anonymously crowdfund for each other. You know, it's just like Instagram posts. It's like, hey, a friend needs support on this. You know, I'm taking Venmo donations, and they do that for each other every time something comes up, when there's a bill that someone can't pay or when someone doesn't have groceries for that month. You know, I know lots of people around the way who, you know, my neighbor can't buy groceries this week. I'm going to go in a grocery shop right now for them, you know, who can send me $5 or $10 on Venmo to contribute to their groceries. Like, these are the type of things that are still meeting people's need, that doesn't require every single person to go out there and do the purchasing or kind of meet that person and like physically, but are so important. I've contributed to so many grocery funds and so many gas tanks and that kind of thing, and all of that is absolutely mutual aid. And so a friend had to remind me recently, like, you know, if you can't pay this bill, like, let us crowdfund for you. Like, that's the mutual and mutual aid, you know. So that's just a really important reminder. You know, for most folks, this is not a full-time job. This is not something that folks are necessarily doing for 24 hours of the day. But instead, it's, you know, like Kay really importantly reminded us about knowing your boundaries and knowing what you have to give. It's like, I'm able to show up at this laundry initiative where we clean our unhoused neighbors' laundry at the laundromat on Saturdays at 9 a.m. for 1 hour. I can do that. That's my commitment for the week. And then on Tuesdays, I'm going to show up to the food bank because, you know, my paychecks don't stretch to Tuesday and I could really use that meal that day. Like, it's the way that you kind of assess your own needs and doing that really important step that Kay highlighted. And like, okay, how can I make that a mutual thing where it's not just me finding a way to meet my need, but I'm finding a way to meet my and others' needs together? How can we put our heads and our resources together to do that? So I think, yeah, I'm just downloading all of the kind of really dope reminders and things folks are given. But it looks like we haven't had too many more questions. So I want to thank everybody one more time so much for joining us tonight. I put this together and I've learned so much. I'm like taking notes mentally and thinking about how to deepen my connection here, since I've only been living here for a year and I haven't really gotten too connected yet. I'm really excited about Kay's workbook and sharing the gospel and letting so many people know that there are resources and tools out there, because it does feel overwhelming. You know, my neighborhood and my community, we have so many issues. There are so many things. We can't possibly address them all. But I am someone who needs visuals and I need to walk through it. I need someone to kind of show me how to get started. And so super appreciative of all the wisdom that we've learned tonight. So thank you again to Kay and Mariana and Ida. I'm sorry, Mariana, did you have another thought? I didn't want to cut anybody off. Okay, awesome. But yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening wherever you are. This recording, as well as a link to the workbook, as well as a feedback survey that I really hope you fill out for me, will all be coming in an email next week. And I appreciate you folks. Hit us up on Instagram at PowerShift if anybody needs us. And have a great night.